Welcome, friends. So glad that you're here joining us for another live Q&A. We are so excited that this Sabbath in particular is the beginning of our Easter sermon series called Eyewitnesses. If you got to watch today's sermon, you are blessed. What an incredible sermon that we got to hear, and what an incredible decision we're posed to make. Well, today, what you're going to be watching is pre-recorded. So I would say, hey, tell us where you're chatting from. And you still can if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, but we won't be able to read those out. But please do that so one another can greet wherever you're coming from. So that would be awesome. Also, just want to tell you a big shout out to all of you who have been faithfully watching. We're so thrilled that you're doing that. But we're also grateful that this weekend in particular, we begin the in-person process of starting to reopen our church. So please do look on our website for registration and how to get a ticket to begin that process. But we're going to be here for all of you who are around the world. And so we're grateful that this media opportunity provides that for us. Well, today we have a great group of panelists, and so I want to bring them on at this time. Hey, friends.
Hi.
See you.
Oh, I'm muted. Okay, there we go.
You're on, Delroy.
Okay, just checking. That's the thing you have to keep doing. Am I muted or am I unmuted?
That's the most commonly asked question these days, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of money in some T-shirts.
Oh my goodness. I've had so many weird experiences, not weird, but funny with this Q&A. My daughter running in the background. One time she was playing on the bookshelves in her underwear. I had to chase our cat off. That's life with this.
Yeah, that's it.
Hey, well, I'm grateful to have Pastor Linda Mendez, our outreach pastor, on here, as well as Pastor Randy Roberts, who is our beloved senior pastor. And truly grateful, Delroy, to have you, Dr. Delroy Brooks, pastor of 16th Avenue Church here, Montana.
Yeah, you got a couple of churches mixed there. It's the Juniper Avenue Church in Fontana, California.
In Fontana.
Yeah.
Welcome, Delroy.
Yeah, the sweatshirt might have given it away.
There we go. There we go. My goodness.
Oh, it's all good, brother. It's all good.
Delroy, you've been part of several things that we've done for our young adult ministry, but some of the church members here haven't maybe met you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, besides the fact that I totally missed up the church that you're from.
Well, oh man, I've been living here now in California for the last 15 years. I've been pastoring at my church for 8 years. For 8 years before that, I was a youth and young adult pastor at a church at Valley Fellowship, which is in Rialto. I'm married. This year will be 25 years. I have 2 children. I have a doctorate degree. I'm a published author. And I like spending a lot of time online. So I've got YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and a TikTok that I don't use often enough, but I'm trying to jump into that as well. So I like to be involved where the people are. So that's awesome. In a nutshell.
Very good, Delroy.
Thanks, Dot.
And a little bit of basketball here and there with Philip.
Yeah, just a little bit. You know, we're still trying to get back to those early morning runs that I can find an indoor place to play. We tried doing it out in where were we? We were out in Caiphas playing outside of a band shell for a couple of weeks there. But my knees don't hold up all that well to that outside playing floor.
Concrete floor, that's rough stuff to run.
Yeah.
Delroy and I guard each other at the bottom. We're those big guys in the court. So it's been funny.
That's us.
Linda's an outside shooter.
Yeah.
Deal with all that.
Linda, did you play basketball in high school, by the way?
No. Have you seen how No. Soccer was my sport.
Oh, nice.
You don't have to have height in that one.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll have to tell you, Linda, and this is kind of coming from what Delroy said too about YouTube. I saw it's like a minute long clip, minute and 10-second clip. You can look for it there. It's David Beckham. He's out on the beach, probably here in Southern California, one of the big beaches, and some guy just gives him a soccer ball, and there are 3 of those big 55-gallon drum trash cans, and they're like 50 yards away. I mean, he says, "Can you hit those?" So first kick, boom, nails it. Second kick, boom, nails it. Third kick, boom, puts it inside, and I'm like,
Oh,
Amazing.
how do you do that?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
that's when you know you've practiced your craft. As
Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell says, you got your 10,000 hours.
10,000 hours.
I had to look twice to make sure if it was Beckham or Linda, but
Oh man.
No, I doubt I have that much energy. 4 hours.
Well, Randy, you've put in your 10,000 hours, brother. We were blessed with your sermon, so thank you so much for that. Really, really appreciate it. Well, as we jump into the first question, I just want to just share with everyone, this sermon series is all about eyewitnesses of the crucifixion of Jesus, those last moments, the last kind of day that the Lord had. And the eyewitnesses each had varied experiences from one another that were filled with decisions they had to make about what they saw. And so I want to ask each of you, have you ever been an eyewitness to some act of injustice? And what decision or feelings emerged when you saw that? So I'd be happy to start. I was 7 years old in our car, and we had one of those kind of station wagons, the old school one where the back seats faced backwards, and I don't even remember what those are called. Randy, you probably know that.
covered wagons.
Covered wagons. We had horses in the front. No. Okay. No, but we were in the car. We were there, Bering Springs, Michigan, and all of a sudden the police lights turn on behind us, and the officer didn't even come out of his car. And it's like 10 minutes pass, 15 minutes pass, 20 minutes pass, and then another police car pulls up, another police car, another. There were probably good 4 or 5 police cars. And then out of nowhere, these guys with guns, now not just a regular gun, but just a machine-like weapon. I don't know what it was, M16, something. They had the full-on gear, everything, and they came to the car. Get out of the car! Get out of the car now! I was like, whoa! I was scared. I scared.
You should be.
I couldn't believe. I know I should. I couldn't believe what was going on, and they had my parents get out. They handcuffed them, and they believed that they had stolen that car. And so it was this complete misunderstanding that had occurred, and my parents had literally had that police officer, the first one, who was kind of one of the campus police there. He was at our home the night before. He knew my family.
Wow.
He knew who they were.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, I'll leave you guys hanging till the very end and tell you the rest of the story. So, yeah. So that was just very frightening, and it was a moment of just complete shock. And as a little boy, I had to decide, how do I feel about these people, and how do I deal with this misunderstanding that had occurred, and the process of needing to forgive. Yeah.
Wow.
I still get a little scared when I see those lights turn on. I won't lie.
Brother. I could tell a story. Well, my story is similar. I hope all of our stories don't have to deal with law enforcement. But when you talk about an act of injustice, because yours had to deal with law enforcement, that puts me to 2 stories of law enforcement. I'll tell the one that's a little more recent. This is 2021. So this is 2020, February 2020. I am I'm leaving the DMV. I've just gotten my sticker to put on my truck. Now, I had gone to the DMV the February before because my registration was actually due in November. So those people who know how that works, y'all know I was late. But when I went to pay for it, they said I still needed to get a smog check. And so that process took a while. I didn't get the smog. It didn't pass smog until like late January, early February. And so I go to the DMV. I got my sticker now. Everything is cool. Got everything in the car. And I'm driving home from the DMV, and I'm just driving through Loma. I'm coming down on Barton Road, going west, heading home. And I get pulled over by a policeman. And so I pull over to the side of the road, and he walks over to the car, and he asks me, license, registration, the whole deal. And I hand it to him, and he takes it and he goes away, and I'm just waiting. And then he comes back after a couple of minutes, and he's like, he's asking me about the registration, and I'm like, well, you have it right there. It's completed. The sticker is on the car. And he's like, yeah, well, we were, I just, was checking. It seemed like your registration was not completed. And I'm like, what? How could that not be? I'm driving from the DMV. And he's like, yeah, well, when we ran the plates, it said that your registration wasn't completed. And my immediate question is, well, why did you run my plates? Because I have a valid sticker on there. And then the other question is, why did you run my plates? I was not speeding. I was on my way home. What was it about what my vehicle looked? My car is not new. It's a very old car. I could not, for the life of me, figure out why you would have pulled me over in the first place. Outside of, and unfortunately it was February, Black History Month, the color of my skin. I couldn't figure out why would you have done that. So after we go through this whole thing, he hands me back everything, and he's like, well, have a good day. And I'm like, I intend to. I didn't really, it wasn't until I got home that I started reflecting on the whole thing. I was like, what on earth? Why would you pull me over if I have a valid sticker? Why would you run my plates if I had a valid sticker? There is absolutely no reason for any of that to have taken place. But that was that one got me for a while. That was bothering for that, because this is 2020. This is a year ago that took place.
Yeah,
Loma Linda. That was bothersome for me.
And that was before everything that had erupted, even. Yeah.
That's before the most recent events.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Delroy.
No problem, brother.
Randy and Linda, anything that you maybe saw or eyewitnessed of some form of injustice in your life? And
I'll tell you something very simple, but it got my blood boiling.
Mercy.
Had taken our little girl Miranda when she was, I don't know, 4 years old, just a little child, down to, I think it was McDonald's, something like that, down toward Colton, because they had the big play pen, I don't know what they call it, jungle gym area in there. And so I was eating something and she was in there playing, and they have this thing that I wouldn't go near today, especially with COVID, but has all the balls in it, where they can.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of eating, wasn't thinking much about it. And then suddenly I looked and I realized she had kind of started crying. She was standing up, and this boy that was probably 10, 11 years old was just picking up balls and winging them at her. Winging them at her. That got my dander up. And I raced over there and I jammed my head inside there, and I told him, you need to come to Jesus. No.
Yeah, I can imagine that altar call.
Anyway, we had a little conversation and he stopped. So when you said that, that's the first thing that flashed into my mind. I don't know why, as a dad, I guess, but very simple. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
could feel it.
But profound. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Linda, you got anything?
Mine's not so much direct like that, but I didn't grow up in this country. I was born here, but when I was 5, my dad decided to take us to Central America and to do mission work over there. And so coming from this country and, you know, having some of the privileges and things that we had gotten used to, and then going to a, you know, country like Costa Rica or El Salvador, where we lived also, it was very shocking because things are done very differently.
Mhm.
And when we first left, my dad decided we needed a car when we got over there. So we would take a car here, load it up with all our possessions, and drive from San Francisco all the way to Costa Rica.
Wow.
Goodness.
And I was 5, my older brother was 7, and when we got to a certain part in Mexico, same story, we got pulled over and we didn't know what we had done. What did we do? And my dad said, don't say anything, don't speak, unless they ask you a question, just don't. And the officer, same thing, came into our, you know, my dad and trying to figure out where we're going. Why do we have so much stuff in our car? You know, are you from here? He sees the California plates, and he goes back to his car and he says, well, I got to make a phone call. And he goes back to his cop car, and my dad says, I know where this is going.
Mhm.
And right away he comes back, and my dad, same thing, starts saying, what, you know, is there a reason why you pulled us over? Can you give me a reason? Did we do something? And nope, there's no reason. But if you want to continue, here's how things are going to work. And as a 5-year-old, I remember just being so impacted, because here you come from a place where you think the law protects you. And now I'm in a situation where the law is trying to take advantage of me. And I remember thinking, we're not safe. What are we doing? Are we and I remember my dad did not buckle. He offered Bibles, he offered cassettes, he offered everything else he had in his car. But he would not give him the money. And I think the cop just got so tired that he said, you know what, just leave.
Yeah.
But it was my first experience with how unjust the world can be sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, each one of these acts in and of themselves is a moment of injustice. And in today's sermon, we begin with someone who was a representative of the establishment, the one who was supposed to uphold the law in a good way, but abused it completely. And so these are great examples of just viewing something so unjust. And the most unjust act was the trial that happened to Jesus. So, Randy, tell us a little bit. Some people maybe haven't watched the sermon yet, and I can't encourage them enough to do so. But tell us a little bit, just a brief summary of the sermon today with this ruthless witness, Caiphas.
Well, like you said, Philip, we begin a series today that moves us toward Easter and beyond, called Eyewitness, Firsthand Stories of Christ's Passion, and looking at half a dozen or so people who were eyewitnesses. And we started with Caiphas. And I think I can understand some of Caiphas. Also, the realities of Caiaphas's story I find disconcerting. Think about an encounter with Jesus. Most of us think about a salvific encounter. He saves us. He gives us peace. He gives us forgiveness. He gives us grace. But the truth is, if we're honest with ourselves when we encounter Jesus, it can also be deeply unsettling. It can be deeply challenging. keep you awake at night, gnawing at the edges of your mind, because I think Caiphas, in coming face to face with Jesus, was face to face with the reality that there's not room for both of us here in this system, the religious system of the day, in the city of Jerusalem. There just wasn't room. There's only room for one who makes those kind of all-encompassing claims. So the history of the high priesthood in particular is very interesting. During the intertestamental period, it became increasingly secularized, increasingly politicized. By the time Caiphas came along, it was a system that was about making the Romans happy that they were keeping the peace. They were cozy with the Romans. They were Hellenized. This was an operation. This was a system. Annas, Caiaphas's father-in-law, was a person crafty and wily and powerful. The high priesthood had been, in the Old Testament times, intended to be a lifetime appointment, spiritually based, made by God. But consider that Annas was high priest. Every one of his 5 sons was high priest, and now his son-in-law Caiphas was high priest. Between the time Herod arrived on the scene and the destruction of Jerusalem, there were like 28 high priests. The average tenure was about 3 years. Caiphas was high priest for 18 years. Stranglehold on this office. And he knew that Jesus threatened everything. Because on the one hand, he threatened their standing with the Romans, because if Caiphas allowed things to get out of control, the Romans would come and shut it down. He also knew he was threatening things with his popularity among his own people. And so it was a precarious position he was in. He was faced by a Jesus who threatened everything that he was clinging to so tenaciously. This is my way of life. This is my livelihood. This man is threatening it. He has to go.
Yeah.
And so I think the bottom line is that question, does Jesus assure you? Does he threaten you? There's only room for one Lord of your life. Who will that be? So it's kind of along those lines.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I think that this is a very unique witness that you start off with, because he does represent that established religion of the day. He was, if we could contemporize it, he was the chief pastor.
Hey, be careful about what you say about that.
I know. There's one right here. Yeah. I wonder what that might speak about the 4 of us in particular as pastors who officially represent this Adventist denomination, and how easy it is to misuse power when you're entrusted with it. And so, and I say this particularly because the world is beginning to mistrust church leaders more and more and more. You had one of the most beloved Christian apologists in the world who was just, ousted from that position because of all kinds of sexual allegations against him, Ravi Zacharias. So how do we kind of work with this now position that you and I are all put in? Any thoughts on that?
Wow, that's a really penetrating question. It's one that we ought to think about carefully on a consistent basis. Because if it ever becomes just a job, if it ever becomes just a way of supporting my lifestyle, if it ever becomes a matter of holding on to power, we're in trouble. And so I think it takes regular self-assessment, regular heart searching.
I think Randy, when he was summarizing his sermons, said something important, that Jesus represented a danger, right? To what was happening. It was almost like it was a constant reminder that if this is how your life is supposed to be lived, then we can't do the things that we want that make our lives better. And I think that's true today. We have to make sure that we don't put our own prerogatives ahead of those that we know, Christ wants of us. And in leadership, sometimes that gets tricky because you get a lot of accolades, you get a lot of reassurance, you get a lot of, and you soon start thinking, this is me, this is my doing, it's about me.
Yeah.
And it's never about you.
I agree. My challenge, or for every person in leadership, we have a responsibility to make sure we surround ourselves with people who will check us. The friend who asks the hard questions, the spouse who gives us the critiques on the things that we've done, not to destroy, but to just ask the extra question to make us, or to align us, or to push us to, are you still where God called you to be? Are you still staying in line with what God has asked of you? I think, Randy, you made a really interesting point when it comes to, are we trying to hold on to something? Whether it's the making sure people always refer to you by your position.
Yeah.
Or is it that we want people to make sure that they treat us a certain way because we have a position, not because of who we are, or that we are as human as everyone else? Yeah, we might have a greater weight on our shoulders because of our responsibility, but that does not make us any more important than the person who is right next to me, or who may not even be able to make it into my church building because they are homeless, or they are without for whatever thing that they have. There is, the statement is, but for the grace of God, I could be there. So it's that constant reminder that we have to have, that whatever it is that we do have, whether it is by education, by vocation, or even by financial blessing, none of it makes us who we are. None of it makes us authentic. What makes us who we are is that connection to God. It is constant reminding, or God's constant reminding of us every day, that what we have, who we are able to meet and connect with, is all by His grace.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh boy, that's powerful.
I found myself in an interesting position some years ago. I followed my wife in her first year of training in residency, and I left being a pastor. There were no positions for pastorates where I had gone, and I landed an opportunity to be a resident as a chaplain. And in this work, I was asked to also then do classwork. And so you're in the middle of this class with other individuals who are doing this residency. And there's some kind of intense moments where the supervisor asks you some grilling questions. I had the privilege of being in that with Delroy for one credit some years ago. And I know, Randy, you've let out and been part of that too. And one question that I asked my colleagues, I just said, hey, how's everyone doing being a chaplain? Because most of them had come from some ministry background. And the supervisor, instead of letting anyone answer the question, he probingly looked at me and he said, Philip, I think you're asking that question of yourself. How are you doing? And the moment he said that, I just start to cry there in front of everyone because I realized I wasn't doing okay not being a pastor. I was not. And I don't mean to diminish the role of chaplain, but I just never felt I was called to that. And so that thing that I felt like I was, now I was not. And the stripping away of that title and that position, it ate at me in such a way I didn't know how to deal with that. But in the process of those tears and the weeks and months that followed after that, God had to strip away this facade that I had built. I don't need you to be a pastor. I need you to be a son. I need you to be my beloved, and I need that to be enough. That's it, Philip. And man, that shook me to the core, because I realized I had put so much into a position, and that isn't at all what God needed me to be, and where my worth needed to come from. That was probably one of the most moving experiences, and I'm reminded of that regularly. And I'm reminded, when Randy, you've said this before, we're all interim pastors. We don't stay somewhere forever. This isn't your calling to be in one place till the day you die. Potentially, God may call elsewhere. Things may move. And that was a very, very good experience for me, but very, very tough. And so Caiphas holding on, gripping on, not that I can completely relate to him, but there's a piece of me that understands,
At the same time, it's not hard to get into a position like that if you're doing a good job. If you believe you're doing the best for the people, you're doing the best for the church, you're doing the best for your community, you don't want to not be doing that anymore. Not because you think so much of yourself, quote unquote, but you recognize you want the good things to keep going. And why would I want to let this go? Because I'm doing so much good. Look at how all the people are doing. Look, all the people coming to the church, or all the money coming to wherever. You start to, as they say now, you believe the hype, or you believe your press clip, and that's where the challenge comes.
Yeah.
That's true. And that's where, Delroy, back to what you said earlier, having people who will speak truth to you, speak truth into your life becomes really important. And whether or not we will listen to what they say as well. And I think, we move into a position in ministry. We, as Delroy said, we care about it. We become identified with it, Philip, kind of like you said, it was a part of your identity. It's really hard to for some reason, be moved aside, be threatened, suddenly realize I can't do that anymore. I think that's what Caiphas saw. He saw that in the person of this humble Galilean itinerant rabbi, the entire house could collapse. And so everything was threatened. And when we feel threatened in that way, we don't always respond in the most healthy ways. We do anything we can to protect ourselves, to protect our system, or whatever the case might be. It's not too hard to understand where Caiphas is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of makes me think about the passage that you read, Randy, in John chapter 11. I don't know if any of you have a Bible near you that could read that. John chapter 11, 49 through 50, just those two verses. I just think that encapsulated this sentiment as a leader, what happens. And if any of you have it, one of you just go ahead and read it.
I got it.
Okay.
Caiphas, who was a high priest at the time, said, "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't realize that it's better for you that one man should die for the people than the whole nation to be destroyed."
Oof. I guess in that verse that you read, Linda, now I'm just seeing it more and more. Caiphas tried to stop Jesus however he could, because he felt threatened, like you both all were saying. And yet God was at work in human flesh in the form of Jesus. And Jesus, during his ministry, had these strong words for people of the establishment, particularly the establishment in rebellion. I don't think Jesus had strong words for anyone but these people. So how can we, or even others who are in leadership positions, ensure they're not getting in the way of Jesus and trying to hinder the work that he's doing in this misguided idea? Hey, I'm protecting the institution. I'm protecting our way of life, those things that we need. When yet Jesus might actually be at work trying to do something, but we're pushing against them. So how
Well,
can we
One
ensure?
thing I would say, Philip, is I remember reading years ago a book called Kingdoms in Conflict, written by Charles Colson.
Mm,
You folk are maybe too young to remember this, but Charles Colson was one of Richard Nixon's right-hand men in the White House when the Watergate affair came to be, and Colson ultimately went to prison over his role in what happened. So Colson says, I went into public service, public office, with the best of intentions and the best of motives. I wanted to serve my country. I wanted to serve people. I wanted to feel like I was making a difference for the good in the world. But he said, over a period of time, this subtle but inexorable change happened, where from wanting to serve and make the best difference one could make for the most number of people, he said, I became increasingly convinced that the good of the nation depended on keeping this man in power, Nixon in office. He said it was a subtle shift, but it was very clear. And as that became my conviction, I was then ready to do whatever I needed to do to make sure that he stayed in office, that he won the election, etc. And he said we did horrible things. There was an opponent to theirs, he said, that we planted a story in the press that had not one iota of truth to it, nothing. And we destroyed the person. Said because we did what we had to do to stay in power.
wow.
Well, I never forgot reading that. And I think there is something within us that can shift, where we've been given a calling, we've been given a ministry, we've been given a position that we can use in a way that blesses people. We can stay open to God, or we can go through that subtle metamorphosis that says, my ability to do God's will depends on me staying here. When we get to that place, we're in trouble.
Wow.
I think the danger too is that as we talk about surrounding ourselves with people that keep us accountable, there's also a danger in that, because we often surround ourselves with people who we think are keeping us accountable, but really are people that we know are going to tell us the things that we sometimes want to hear. And so sometimes discerning who's guiding us in the right direction is hard, because in this case, they come to Caiphas and he just says, you guys know what you need to do. You guys just don't want to admit that this is what you need to do. And so he's telling them the truth about where they're at. He's keeping them accountable with their actions and their feelings, but it's not in a positive way. And so sometimes that's difficult, because we are in these positions of power, and we think, oh, well, if I wasn't making the right choice, the people around me would tell me. But the danger lies that sometimes we surround ourselves with people who, like Randy said, are in our camp, and they stand to benefit from us being in those positions. And so it sometimes gets hard to remain truthful to what you're supposed to be doing.
Wow.
I think this is another name that dates me, but there was a head coach of the Houston Oilers. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Houston Oilers, but they are now known as the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah.
When they were in Houston, they had a head coach named Bum Phillips. And I mean, wouldn't you like to raise a son named Bum Phillips? So Bum Phillips. But anyway, he was known for all of his witticism. And after he'd been fired from Houston, he made the comment in the press, there's only two kinds of coaches. Them's what's been fired, and them's what's going to be fired. And, there's probably some truth to that. And in a business like that, this doesn't belong to me. I'm here for a period of time. I think it's not a bad thing for us as pastors to remember. This does not belong to us. It would have been a good thing for Caiphas to remember. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how do you ensure that you don't allow yourself to hinder the work of God in some spaces? How can you and I be more receptive to recognizing that when there is some pushback, when there is some issue, that maybe we actually need to be a little bit more open to listening to those of countering views and differing opinions, because maybe that might be Jesus speaking, or I don't know. How do you ensure that you're literally not just pushing Jesus and his will out of the way because it's painful or it's threatening?
I think moreover, I think that's the problem, that we're trying to be sure of something. And the only thing that as leaders we are supposed to always be sure of is Jesus. That's what we're always sure of. Everything else, we taking it by, I almost say that that's what we're taking by faith. But we're used to doing the things that we're quote unquote sure of that are not necessarily in line with who Jesus is, but we're sure we can do this. I'm sure if I put this program on, we're going to get a lot of people to come. I'm sure if I can get this name on the program, all these people will come. Versus, I'm not sure if this is going to work, but I am sure if we have been diligent about what we were supposed to do, that God will bless whatever the outcome is.
Yes.
It changes our mindset, because then we're always in this place where we are willing to be uncomfortable. Because because our way of doing ministry is very rarely about being uncomfortable with what the possible outcome is. We always want to be sure we're going to be able to raise these funds, or we can get these people, or we're going to be in this spot. For people who have done mission work, who have spent time in places that were unfamiliar among people who have a different culture, or you've spent any time around in an area where you've had to depend on others in order for you to go forward, that way of ministry, while it's extremely rewarding, it has also got you always on your knees. It will always have you unsure. It's like, God, I have nothing else but whatever you say to do.
Yeah.
I'm waiting on so-and-so this money to come through. It's not here. I don't know how. But when we come on the other side of those things, we can say, I saw God move in these ways. And I'm convinced that whatever God wants to do, he is going to do. And I think more often, and I'm talking too much. Okay, but you understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That just reminds me that so many times you think you need money to do something. You need the power of the Holy Spirit to impress upon you his direction, his will. And rarely is it a money issue. Oh, I can't do X, Y, and Z because I don't have the money. Or is it, man, have you been prayed up? Spend that time on your knees, seeking after Jesus to be the innovator, the promoter. And yeah, Delroy, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, I think what Delroy said, one part that I'd like to piggyback on is, if our own souls are humble before God and open to God's Spirit moving and guiding in our lives, I think we will stay at a place where we're malleable and God is able to use us and guide us in the directions he wants us to go. When we come to the place where we're self-sufficient, we know it all, we know what we need to know, it's a business, I'll take care of it. Yeah, that may not be the best place to be.
One of the commentaries that I read for this mentioned something that I found very interesting, and it said they knew his miracles, they had seen them, they believed them, and yet they couldn't recognize his mission. I feel like often that's where we place ourselves. We know what his mission is. We've seen what he's capable of doing in our lives, in the lives of our churches, of our members, but our self-interest and our own motives get in the way of his mission. And so I think it's a matter of surrendering every day so that his mission can be what we are pushing and not our self-interest.
Yeah. I like that, Linda.
I read a book called Too Great a Temptation by a pastor named Joel Gregory. And it's an interesting book. It tells his story of going into a church in Dallas, a church that had 2 senior pastors in 100 years. Wow. They each been there about 50 years, one 49 or 48, the other 51 or 52.
Wow.
100 years, 2 senior pastors. And the one he was going in to replace wasn't ready to leave. So they called a new senior pastor. The church had 2 services. And the senior pastor who had been there for 51 years told the new senior pastor who had been hired, he called him lad. And Scott repeated that when he said, "Lad, you're welcome to preach the first service. I'll be preaching the second service." And he said that's the way it was. And it was that way for 2 years until he said, "I left. I couldn't take it anymore." Because the person would not relinquish the reins. Well, you can imagine. You talk about being in one place over a period of years, and I've had that wonderful privilege. And so there are kids that you've watched grow up and you dedicated, and now you baptize and you marry them. It's a great blessing. Can you imagine 50 years later how many generations you've seen come and go? So a mindset had set in that I own not just this church setting, I own this town. Yeah, there does come a point where, and it doesn't always have to, I've realized, doesn't always have to do with length of tenure. It can have to do with popularity. It can have to do with power. It can have to do with money. It can have to do with influence. It can have to do with a lot of other things that are problematic when you're trying to do surrendered ministry for Jesus.
Wow. So I mean, how do you know, this is an interesting topic. I mean, how do you know when it's your time to go?
Hey, Philip, you're getting into my prayer life now. I'll tell you what my prayer is. My prayer is simply this: God, don't let me be the last to know.
Right.
Let all them know. Let me know.
Oh man, that's a good point.
I've wrestled with that a lot. And a friend of ours, Phil, because I know you have roots in Berrien Springs, is Dwight Nelson, and I've talked about that. And I think there are a whole range of ways to know, but at the core of that, I personally think if an individual comes in 2 years or 30 years to the point of saying, "This is mine, I own this," it's time to go. I can tell you one prayer I prayed earlier from the day we accepted this and still continue to try to keep this uppermost is, God, ever remind me to hold this loosely because it is not mine. This does not belong to me.
Yeah.
And that's ministry, period. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, that's ministry. It's a precious gift God has given us.
Yeah. I believe it. You pushed us in this sermon to also ponder a quote that I really I have to read this, and I'd love to hear how this quote impacts the rest of you. This one is from Eugene Peterson's book, The Jesus Way. And you write, or you shared, Given the prominence of the way of Caiphas, Jesus needed to make sure that his own followers did not misunderstand what was involved in following him. Following Jesus is not a path to privilege. It is not a way to get what you want. It is the inside track to a higher standard of living.
It is not an inside track.
It is not. Yes, it is not an inside track to a higher standard of living. In both Judaism and the church, there have always been a lot of people who expect everything to turn out wonderfully when they commit themselves to God's ways, worship faithfully, study their Bibles, witness to their friends, and give generously. But it is following Caiaphas that gets you that kind of life, not following Jesus. Jesus makes that explicit when he says, if you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross. Matthew 16:24.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I just feel like that kind of relates to what you were saying. It's this notion that you almost think that the positions you get to, they're leading to this better way of life, and I don't want to let go of that better way. But it's like, man, I haven't been called to the better way of my personal well-being, but the better way of his kingdom. And so where is that? So what do you guys think?
I think that we get confused a lot, and I saw somebody write this most recently. When we consider what success is, as people of the book or people of the word or God's people, as Adventist people, our desire, success should be seeing other people come into a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. That's success. But the longer and longer that you are here in this country, the United States specifically, in the West, going back to that the quote that Randy used from the guy Chuck, I just forgot his last name, from the Nixon administration, Chuck Colson.
Yeah,
that we have these great intentions, depending on no matter how you grew up, but it's this starting to learn this process or this system that's a part of the quote unquote American way. I would dare call it the American gospel, this pursuit of life, liberty, and this pursuit of happiness, that we forget that whole idea of taking up the cross. Why take up a cross when I could choose to be happy? I want to be happy. I don't want negative stuff. So then we start shifting our focus as to what does success look like. We start comparing. We do the comparison game, and those sorts of things keep us, or so ever so slightly shift our intent to, well, I just want to, well, what's so wrong? When we start asking questions like that, well, what's wrong with you've already gone wrong. When we start justifying what we do, well, I think, well, then we're going the wrong way, because it's supposed to be, what does God's word say, and how has God impressed us to, what does he want us to do? It doesn't mean that you can't have, the trappings of material success by following Jesus. It's not an either or, but it's being willing to say that I'm going to follow Jesus, and whatever God wants me to do, I am going to commit to that. And that's where my success is found.
I love that.
Very true.
Man.
There's a song that came to mind after we read this text, and it's the song, Let Them See Jesus in Me. I think for me, that's what I try to remind myself as I, do the job that I do here with outreach, is what's my motivation behind the decisions that I make? Will people see Jesus through the decisions that we make, or will they see me? And sometimes that's a little hard, but it's something that every day we have to struggle with. What's the motivation behind my decision?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that skit called The Stool. I don't know if any of you have seen it on YouTube. It's a story of a man who struggles to give God full control of his life. You know, and I wonder, as we kind of get to the very end here of our Q&A time, just what steps can we daily ensure that Jesus has the very first place in our life, so we don't get this hard-hearted place that we're in rebellion as Christian leaders, parents, followers of Jesus? What can we ensure daily that Jesus has the first place, and it's his vision of the life we're supposed to live, not the life that we think, which is material goods and other things?
Philip, I might mention 2 or 3 things, one of which would be, if we say we're giving him first place in our life, I think a good question to ask is, am I giving him first place in my day? Start the day on my knees. Do I start the day with scripture? I started a disciplined habit now some time ago, and you'll remember this, Philip, because we read this book together as a staff, but where one of the habits was a very simple habit, 3 words long: scripture before phone.
Yeah.
Putting Jesus first place in my life, first hour of my day is wrapped up in this, is disingenuous. So I think maybe, you know, am I giving him first place in my day? For me, another way to tell what I'm allowing Jesus to do in my heart and my life is, how am I treating the people around me? How am I treating my wife? How am I treating the people I work with? How am I treating somebody at work who may be irritating, or somebody in the neighborhood that I may not naturally like? Somebody who's in need, somebody who's a different color or culture or religion, somebody who's different from me. How am I treating them? I think the place Jesus has in our lives is often reflected in the treatment we give to others. I think there's some very practical things like that that probably help us answer that question. I think another question that probably is worth us asking as pastors would be, if I didn't do religion as a profession, I wasn't paid to be at the church, I wasn't paid to attend church, I wasn't paid to give Bible studies, I wasn't paid to do all these things, what place would they hold in my life? I don't know. Some questions like that might be worth asking.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That scripture before phone. That's one I have to keep reminding myself of. That's what the common rule, right? That's
common rule, Delroy. You're exactly right.
Yeah, the common rule. That book, and there's a I'm not going to call it a companion book, but there was another book along those same lines called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, that reminds us also to get into these habits that would keep us grounded. But I think that the basic thing, Paul says it in the 1 Corinthians, that I die daily.
Yeah.
Every day. We're to die to self. And that's not always an easy thing to do, especially when that means I'm putting somebody else in front of me.
It keeps crawling off the altar, man. I get it up there on the altar and it crawls off.
Well, that's it, man. That's the thing, Philip. Every day we gotta, go before the Lord, man, and just say, God, you have your way. I don't know what this day is going to have for me. I think the other thing that we have to be careful of, I think, is this idea of always protecting ourselves. I remember listening to Andy Stanley talking about praying, that he stopped praying for protection. You know, our tendency when you leave the house, you get in the car, God help us to get to our destination safely and that sort of thing. And he had made this comment about not praying for protection. And I was kind of like intrigued, like, why wouldn't you do that? But his thought process was, God, place me wherever you would need me to be today for your name to be glorified. And in that sort of a prayer, it meant that, God, I'm submitting my day to you. So I don't need you to protect me from the accident that would keep me focused on you, or to keep me out of the conflict that would force me to come back to recognizing that I'm not all of that. It's that sort of a prayer life that, one of my members just finished reading this devotional series called Dangerous Prayers. Those are the dangerous style prayers that I don't think that we push ourselves and sometimes our members to be engaged in that sort of a prayer activity or Jesus following lifestyle that keeps that will push us into a more mature faith. Because I think that's a lot of our issues come from. We're just not mature enough in our faith.
Wow, Delroy.
That's very true. And I think, to build off what Delroy just said, Philip, I would add, if our religious life is consistently comfortable, we're missing something somewhere. The full gospel, we're not hearing the full call of Jesus. There's not some level of discomfort, something I don't like.
Great point.
A bumper sticker in my car that it's a constant reminder for me that I need, but I think it says Micah 6:8. He's showing you, man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly. And that's, I think as long as we start our day remembering that God wants us to be just, merciful, and loving, I think, we're off to a good start.
That's amazing.
I read someone who said, you've made God in your own image when God hates all the same people you do.
Oh, man.
Right there.
Hey, well, friends, I just thank you so much for this time. This has been rich. I do want to just conclude and want to make a statement that, Randy, you made near the end of your sermon. You said this, and I thought it was just so good. You said, we ought not jab an accusing finger at Caiphas until we've taken the time to decide whether or not Jesus threatens our way of life, our religion, and our understanding of God. So, friends, those of you watching, can you take some time as this program concludes to ponder if Jesus and all that he represents might be threatening to your way of life? And in what way can you slowly bring your fear into alignment more with surrender? When you realize Jesus died for you because he loves you so much that you might live your best life, a life, though, that God desires for you. Thank you so much, Delroy, for being part of this. Linda, Pastor Randy, as always.
Thanks.
Love all of you.
Delroy.
You're welcome. Good to see you, Randy. Nice to meet you, Linda. You got
nice
it.
To meet you too.
All right. Blessings, friends. We'll see you same time, same place next week.